Good morning. Whether you are here in the sanctuary with us or you are watching from at home or the library, it's wonderful for all of us to be together. So as we settle in together for the hour, let us go ahead and pause now to center our minds and our hearts for worship, for lifting up that which is of worth in our lives. So we begin today with the words of Richard S. Gilbert. We meet on holy ground, brought into being as life encounters life, as personal histories merge into the communal story, as we take on the pride and the pain of our companions, as separate selves become community. How desperate is our need for one another, our silent beckoning to our neighbors, our invitations to share life and death together, our welcome into the lives of those we meet, and their welcome into our own. May our souls capture this treasured time. May our spirits celebrate our meeting in this time and in this space, for we all meet on holy ground. And so come, my friends, and let's worship together.
It's time for us to light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Does anybody want to come up and help light? Maybe some of the little ones over here to my left? Okay, come on. Yep, great. Please stand as you're able as we kindle our chalice light. And the words I share today are by Adam Slate. We gather this morning as one community, a community united by common ideals: love, justice, diversity, freedom, mutual care, equity. Yet look around. Look at the faces of those around you. Each face represents an individual. Every one of us with our own story, needs, strengths, and faults. We light our chalice today honoring our common connection and also the uniqueness that lives within each of us. And now let's read our affirmation by James Villa Blake together. It's on your screen, but we're going to do it a little bit differently than some other times we've done it. What we're going to do to help out the little kids who can't read yet is I'm going to read each line and then you'll say it back to me. Love is the spirit of this fellowship.
Love is the spirit of this fellowship.
And service is its law.
And service is its law.
This is our great covenant.
This is our great covenant.
To dwell together in peace.
To dwell together in peace.
To seek the truth in love.
To seek the truth in love.
And to help one another.
And to help one another.
Great. And you can stay standing because the next thing is our first hymn, which is number 197 in your gray hymnal. There are numerous strings. Good morning. I'm Steve Runyon, your worship associate today. Welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Welcome especially to any newcomers and returning members. We're delighted to have you with us. After the service, please fill out a welcome card to help you get connected with us. You can also talk to our welcome ambassador, who would love to meet you and answer any questions. Look for the gold sash. If you need a caring presence and listening ear this morning, our lay pastoral care associates are available in the library after the service. However, we do have one associate who is not, she's out sick.
She's out sick, but she's available through email, and we also have one lay pastoral care associate who is here today.
Yes, thank you. I don't know where I lost that announcement, but it's here somewhere. So yes, look for the sky blue sash. We're a community of many ages, but we all worship together. You can join us many ways on Sundays, including online, here in the sanctuary, or from our library just outside the sanctuary. The library is great if you need a space to talk or get the wiggles out. Our service is live streamed there, so you won't miss a thing. We always have exciting things happening, and here are a couple. Next week, we will have a volunteer fair after the service where you can learn about many exciting opportunities for you to get involved and to make a difference in Morristown UU, including for our audio-visual team, the child care crew, communications bees, justice council, Religious Education Council, and even a new junior worship associates team, and much more. And if your team is looking for volunteers and would like to participate in the volunteer fair, please contact Katie to reserve your table. Today, please join us from 11:30 to 12:30 in Chew Hall for the second and final in-person gathering to explore this year's first open question. What does it mean to be welcoming? Everyone is welcome to attend, including newcomers. If you can't make it in person, there are 2 online opportunities to participate in the coming weeks. Sign-up details and more information about these and many other activities can be found on the back of your order of service, our weekly e-newsletter, or on the website at muuf.org. Finally, please join us after the service for social hour, and we are glad you're here today.
Can I have some of my friends come up so we can tell a story together? I need to find my stuff. My other thing died. So I gotta get out my phone. My mom's gonna text me and tell you, why am I looking at my phone during the service? That's right. Come on, sit down with me. Come on, we're gonna tell a story. I gotta look at my notes. Otherwise I forget things. That's what happens when you get old. All right. So every week, just so everyone knows, and you guys know this because you guys are in classes, what do we do every week, every month in class? You guys study something. Starts with a TH. A theme every month? Yeah, there you go, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, I know. That was a weird, I phrased the question wrong. Weird. So we study a theme every week. Or every month, rather. And so what is this month's theme? Does anyone know? Was anyone paying attention last week? No? Okay. Stories. Very good. Very good. So every month is a theme about stories. And do you know we don't only study it in RE? Where else do we talk about those themes? Nope. Huh? Wait, hold on. Right here. Yeah, that's right. In the service. Good job. All right. So when you pay attention to when Reverend Sasha's speaking later, she's going to talk about stories too. We're going to tell a story right now. So I'm going to tell you the story. It's called The Storyteller by April Rosario. It is about stories, you're correct. Once upon a time, long ago, in a village, lived an old woman known as the Storyteller. And she had been part of the village for a very long time, as long as anyone can remember, and no one really knew where she came from. It didn't matter, though. Everyone in the village loved her and sought her out because she was known to have the best stories in the land. Do you guys know anyone who tells good stories? She had a story for everyone, everything. Stories for times of joy and times of sorrow and times of triumph and of loss. Stories for when you were hurt or excited, and stories that taught about love, and stories that shared wisdom about what to do when you're afraid. Every night, she would light her fire and wait for folks to join her, kind of like this, right? And every night they did. And one at a time, they would ask for the kind of story they were needed to hear, right? Story about loss or love or something like that. And when she was done, the villagers would often ask her if there was anything they could give her as payment for her stories, right? They told her a great thing, they want to pay her. What a wonderful way to make the economy go. For her stories, and her answer was always the same. Yes, what do you think she wanted for her payment? What?
For them to listen to the story?
To listen? Oh, you're getting there. No, it's even simpler than that. She would say, I want you to tell me a story. But the villagers rarely did. Most often they would leave her a small homemade gift instead, and they would keep their stories close, fearing judgment or ridicule. They didn't want to tell their own stories because they didn't do it as well as the old lady. And one day a young man burdened with the painful past approached the storyteller. He had lost his horse in a tragic accident, and the weight of the grief was more than he could bear. Yeah, his horse, his pet, right? If you guys lost a pet, has anyone lost a pet in here? Okay. The storyteller, with a gentle smile, replied, the most powerful stories... He pleaded with her to share a story that might offer him some peace. And the storyteller, with a gentle smile, replied, the most powerful stories are not the ones we hear, but the ones we tell. Your story, though heavy, holds a key to healing. And hesitantly, the young man began to share his tale of loss, his voice trembling with emotion. And as he spoke, the storyteller listened actively, her eyes reflecting deep understanding. And as villagers passed by her fire, they paused to hear what the young man was saying. And the storyteller mentioned for them to sit down. And they did, and one after another, more and more, they sat. When he finished, the storyteller shared a story of her own, a tale of a young girl who had also had loss in her life, but found strength in sharing her grief with others. When she finished, another villager shared their story, right? Because now more people were sharing. And then another, and they all kept sharing their stories. And as the night went on, the fire burned hot and bright, and they began to realize their pain was not unique, and the others had walked similar paths, and that by sharing their own stories, they could offer comfort and support to each other who might be struggling in silence. The next morning, the storyteller was gone, and by her fire, there was a note that read, "You don't need me anymore, for you have each other, and together you have more stories than you will ever need if you just remember to share them." And from that day on, each of the villagers took turns that night lighting the fire and sharing their stories. And the story circles grew and grew until eventually the whole village was taking turn listening and sharing stories for times of joy and times of sorrow and triumph and loss. The end. So one of the things I like about that story is that it reminds us how important our stories are, right? And how important they are to forming relationships. You guys ever tell stories about things? Big ones, long ones? I bet you, right, when you come home from school, you tell stories of shenanigans that happened at school and things like that. No, you don't tell your parents anything about what happened at school? Right? Or you tell stories to your friends? Huh? And as the storyteller taught the villagers, our stories, even the difficult ones, hold immense power when shared. By opening ourselves up to vulnerability, we create connections and friendships and better ways of understanding each other and ourselves. So, now, here is what you were saying before, Charlotte. In the weeks and days ahead, many of us, kids and adults alike, hold on to this story. Remember this story about the old lady who told stories, and then she didn't have to tell stories when everyone started telling each other stories, huh? And remember to take a risk and tell a few stories. So tell stories about what happened in school. Maybe your parents might find it interesting. Right, parents? Right? Yeah, that's an interesting story. Right, so tell your stories. And that's what we're going to talk about today in the service and in class. So here's what I also want you to do. I want you to pay attention to Reverend Sasha. And then when you get into class, I want you to, with your teachers, try to see what things are the same. See if there's any connection points. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
Where did the storyteller go?
No one knows. Poof. All right, let's go sit back down, okay?
She went to live in the woods in Dorothy House.
Yeah, there you go.
So now it's time for our milestones and passages. Sometimes when we come to this sacred place, we come here with a lot on our hearts. Perhaps you got married, maybe you lost a job, or you recovered from an illness, or went through a divorce. And whatever your joy or sorrow or concern, you can share it here in our service by filling out our milestones and passages form before 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. You can find that form by following the link that is in our newsletter. And you can also fill out one of our milestones and passages forms cards before the service and just hand it to me or to our worship associate. This morning we have a few milestones and passages to share, and I ask that you respond, we hold you in our hearts after each of these. So this morning we hold in our hearts all of those affected by the wildfires in Los Angeles County, including some of our fellow Unitarian Universalist congregations like the Neighborhood Church in Pasadena, whose members have had to evacuate and some of which have lost their homes. The UU Church of the Verdugo Hills, which is on the border of the evacuation zone, and the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Santa Monica, which is very close to the evacuation warning zone. And we extend our love to them and to the many, many other people there in Los Angeles County, including some of our own beloveds who are in danger right now and whose homes and livelihoods are in the path of danger as well. May you and yours be safe from harm, and we hold you in our hearts. This morning, Michael Hacker shares that his significant other and longtime MUF member, Judy Harris, was transferred to Morris View Rehab this week. Cards, visits, and calls are welcomed, although calls are subject to the availability of help with the phone. Michael, who is currently bedridden with norovirus in Bedminster, and cannot attend Judy, is also available by phone as listed in Realm. We hold you in our hearts. Michael also reminds us, especially those with Haitian acquaintances, that today is Jour de Remembrance, Earthquake Remembrance Day. This morning we send healing thoughts and give love and support to the Haitian community here in the United States, who have been slandered and under threat of deportation by our incoming administration. We hold you in our hearts. And now let's go ahead and take a quiet time now for the prayers and meditations in our own hearts. Go ahead and close your eyes. Settle down into your chair, get nice and comfy. Take some time focusing on your breath. Hear the breaths of the people all around you, this community that holds you. Feel the spirit of life holding all of us together in this still moment. Let's take a few more deep breaths together and then a moment of silence. Amen and blessed be. Now let's go ahead and remain seated as we sing number 346 in your gray hymnal, Come Sing a Song with Me.
Reverend Sasha invited me to share a personal reflection on this morning's theme. In last week's service, I was thinking about today's theme of building connections through storytelling. During the minute of silence in that service, something struck me. Honestly, even though my life tends to be on the quiet side anyway, I still spend a lot of time thinking about the importance of quiet and reflection. And in our attention-switching, Adderall and caffeine-fueled society, we do need those things. But just as we need to listen when others are talking, sometimes we need to speak, not in defense of others, not to preach our values, simply to talk and share our personal stories, big and small. Only when sharing goes in both directions can we build true connection. Otherwise, whoever is listening might be considered an unpaid therapist rather than a friend. And as much as we need therapists, we need friends even more. As Alan Wells noted in his sermon last month, connections are what gives our lives meaning, relating with others, not just listening and not just talking. For over 25 years now, I've been privileged to participate with my wife's family in a holiday that Judaism has set aside for storytelling. Passover is all about telling the story of the flight from Egypt, slavery in Egypt, to freedom in the Promised Land. And as it says in the Haggadah, the celebration that goes with the Passover meal, we tell the story because it's our story and our kids' story. Because by making it personal, making it my story, it and that faith tradition become part of me and the people I'm with, not something that happened to a bunch of strangers 3,500 years ago. Many of you may have heard of The Moth on National Public Radio. It's a time for mostly ordinary people to tell stories from their lives. It's amazing that week after week, year after year, there's always something touching, humbling, and instructive in those stories. And they're not from self-help authors or mountaintop gurus, but ordinary people. Think how much the world would lose if they didn't tell their stories. Sometimes we need to stop and not listen, but tell of ourselves through our stories. And we come now to the time in our service each Sunday when we pause to offer our gifts of financial support to this congregation. Your donations make all that we do here possible and also help make our wider community a better place, because each Sunday we give at least half of the money we collect to an organization that is doing good work to advance our Unitarian Universalist values of love, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. Today's offering will be split 50-50 with Norwest Cap, which empowers individuals and families to move away from the crisis of poverty and towards a future where they can thrive. You may give in our collection plate or by following the instructions printed in your order of service and shown on the screen. Thank you in advance for your generosity.
So as we heard earlier today, this month's Soul Matters theme is story. And so next week we are going to talk a little bit about how stories can help us to find strength and courage in the face of injustice and to help make a better world. And on the last Sunday of this month, we are going to take a look at religious stories and how they can be valuable for us as Unitarian Universalists. But this morning, we're going to be diving into how sharing our personal stories can help us to build stronger friendships and a closer community. As the Doctor once said in the BBC show Doctor Who, I'm a nerd, I apologize. The Doctor said, "We are all stories in the end." Our lives are like books, each with a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have chapters, characters, and adventures. Sometimes, like characters and stories, we face challenges, but we also sometimes discover some important truths along the way that help us to grow. In our own life stories, we sometimes play two different roles. Sometimes we're more like a character, and sometimes we're more like an author. Things sometimes happen to us, things that are out of our control, and that makes us maybe a little bit more like a character in a story. But we also often write our own stories with the choices that we make and the decisions and the actions that we take in the world. And so in that way, we're more like authors sometimes. One of our religious education classes for adults here in this congregation, UU Writers, has a fun exercise for this month's theme of story. The class gives students fun prompts to take home and write about to help them think about their lives. And one of those questions is, what genre is your life right now? Is it a mystery, a romance, a thriller, fantasy, young adult, fiction, nonfiction, satire, self-help, travel? What kind of story is your life right now? And this exercise is a great way to reflect more deeply on our own life narratives. And now, as a writer myself, I really love creating stories. I love writing short stories. I really love writing novels. That's where my heart is. And I love writing sometimes little stories for my sermons. And one thing, though, that I have learned along the way is, as much as I love writing stories, it isn't as much fun as it could be unless I also get to share those stories. Stories are meant to be shared, and that includes our personal stories, the stories about our own lives. And it's important to share our stories with our friends and our families, and also here in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. And sharing stories isn't just a way to entertain one another. I know sometimes we think, I shouldn't share my story unless it's entertaining, unless it's well-crafted, it's exciting. But no, that's not the purpose of sharing stories. Sharing stories is also a basic human need that we all have. We all need ways to express ourselves and to be known to others, to have people know what's going on in our lives, how we're feeling. And sharing our stories can help us to find understanding and connection with other human beings. In any congregation, there are all kinds of things going on that you can do, and this congregation is no different. There are things here that we can do to feed our minds, like interesting classes or presentations that fill your heads with lots of information, really interesting bits of information. There are fun things that we can do together, like our ice skating outing later this month. And it can be tempting sometimes to do these things and nothing else. But the thing is that by themselves, those things do not meet our deepest spiritual needs, because we also need to be able to share our stories with one another, and that takes a different kind of space. Storytelling offers something really special. It offers a deeper kind of connection. Sharing our stories helps us to connect more deeply with ourselves, to understand ourselves on a deeper level, and it also helps us to connect more deeply with others, to be known and to understand one another on a deeper level. Now, many of you have shared with me that the main reason you came here, whether you came here recently or you came here a long time ago, the main reason you came here is because you were looking for community. You were looking for community and friendship, and many of you have found lifelong friendships here. Some of you have found spouses here. And storytelling is such a great way to make new friends and to deepen relationships, both in our personal lives and here in our congregation. Stories, one story at a time, build bonds between us. And I'm wondering if you remember those books that kept you up late at night, under your covers with a flashlight. And raise your hand if you maybe did that as a kid. Keep your hand up or raise your hand now if you kind of sometimes do it now. Because there's nothing quite like a blanket fort and, a reading under the covers to read a book the correct way, right? And so when we get all caught up in a book like that, so caught up that we are sacrificing sleep, and I love sleep, but sometimes I sacrifice it to read, it isn't just because we want to know what happens next in the story. We do want to know what happens next, but what we really want to know is what happens to the characters in the story next. When we read, we come to care about these characters and their journeys as though they're real people. We read on because we want them to get through whatever it is they are going through, and books definitely pull them through all kinds of things, and we want them to find their happily ever after, and so we keep reading on until we find out that they will be happy and well. And if we can care so much about fictional characters because of stories, imagine how much more we can connect with real people through their stories, the real people all around us. And that is part of the power of sharing our stories. Stories help us to connect emotionally and to care for one another, which can lead to friendship. And that's why here in our congregation, we try to give you many different opportunities to share your stories with one another, like the milestones and passages during our service and our religious education classes after our services. And the stories we tell in these spaces connect us with one another around things that we share. So earlier, Nick told a story about how sharing grief helped a community to come together. Grief can sometimes make us feel very alone. But when we share our grief with others, we feel less alone and we can find comfort and offer comfort. And that's why each week we take that time to share some of the things that we're going through during our milestones and passages. But also happier things than grief, happy things, can also bring us together, things that we share in common. And we try to make some space for those things in our milestones and passages as well. I wonder if there's ever been a time in your life when you have shared a story with someone about a hobby that you enjoy or a belief that you have, and it turned out that you both shared it, and then that sparked a friendship and you are friends now. And that has happened to me way too many times to count over the years. In fact, Smokey and I first connected back during college because of a shared love of role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. We briefly were not paying as much attention to class as we should have. We wrote some notes back and forth about how a thing in class reminded us of Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games, and friendships sparked. And, we might have otherwise gone our separate ways after that class ended, but because we shared our personal stories of something we loved and we connected around that shared interest, we are still together today. So personal stories can turn casual acquaintances into lifelong relationships. And that is the power of storytelling. It helps us to find common ground and to build deeper connections with one another. But even if we do not share common ground, stories can still help us to connect. We can also forge relationships by learning about one another's differences. Here in this congregation, we do not just tolerate difference, but we value difference among us. We know that it is important for us to have diversity in order for us to grow. Hearing diverse stories reveals different perspectives, and when it comes to the big questions of life and meaning, each and every one of you is like a little puzzle piece, your own unique puzzle piece. And when we bring those different pieces together, we are able to see a much greater whole than we might have been able to if everyone's story was exactly the same. And I'll give you just a little bit of an example. So I'm teaching the starting point class with Carol Todd, and in last week's class, it's for newcomers, we all took turns in the class sharing our spiritual journeys. And we also, as part of that conversation, shared things about our religious past that were meaningful for us, things that we wanted to hold on to, and things about our religious past that we wanted to let go of. And one person shared that she enjoyed the rituals of her religious past, and she actually wanted to keep those in her life. Those were meaningful for her. And another person shared a story about how the thing from her religious past that she most wanted to let go of was the rituals. And so imagine if the people in that class had not heard each other's stories. You know, we might have all believed that all Unitarian Universalists just love worship that is full of rituals, or we might have believed that all Unitarian Universalists shy away from rituals. And we might have made some conclusions about what our community should be like as a result. You know, maybe we would have decided that we should create a community that is all ritual all the time, or that we should forever ban ritual from our midst. And that's the kind of thing that can happen when we're limited to just one story, to one viewpoint. It can paint a narrower world for us. But when we share our different stories, that can help us to understand one another better and to make space in our community for everyone. And rather than doing ritual all the time or no ritual whatsoever, that's why we do a little ritual alongside other things. You know, we light and extinguish our chalice, and that's a ritual, and we also share readings. We say things like, we hold you in our hearts after our milestones and passages, and we also listen to, music and a sermon. We do many different things here because there are many different people here with many different needs, and we learn about one another's different spiritual needs through the stories that people share with one another here. And when we hear many different stories, it paints a much richer picture of our community, and it helps us to make our congregation stronger and more caring. And that, I think, is a really beautiful thing. So we're going to go ahead and pause now as we do here in our sermon, and we're going to sing together for a little while. Let's go ahead and remain seated for this song. We're going to sing just the first verse of hymn number 1008. It's in your teal hymnal if you'd like to have the music in your hands. It's also on the screen, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. In the story that Nick shared earlier, the storyteller said something interesting. She said, the most powerful stories are not the ones we hear, but the ones that we tell. And while I think that is true, in fact, we wouldn't hear any stories at all unless people told them, it's also true that, well, we Unitarian Universalists really like to talk. We really love to talk. Storytelling is powerful to be sure, but it's also important for us to remember that listening to one another's stories is important and powerful too. As Unitarian Universalists, we love to share our thoughts. We're eager to share our stories, our opinions, our advice, and our dreams with one another. But sometimes we can get so excited about our turn to share that we sometimes forget to listen when it is somebody else's turn. We might be so eager to turn for our turn that we just don't truly hear the other person's stories. But as Steve reminded us earlier, only when sharing stories goes in both directions can we build true connection. And to truly connect, we have to listen as much as we talk. And that's why we call it sharing a story instead of just telling a story, there are at least two people involved in the sharing of a story, one who is telling the story and one who is listening to the story. And both share in the story together like two people who are, carrying a big box together. Everyone who yearns to tell their story really yearns to be listened to. We don't want to just get our words out there, but we want our words to land in someone's heart. Imagine that you have a story to tell, but you feel like no one cares to listen. Instead, they are too busy telling their own stories to ask you to share yours, and it might make you feel unwelcome or lonely. But what if instead we treated each person we encounter like they are a sacred mystery, and we approached one another with mutual curiosity? If we maybe saw one another more like mystery novels to explore, then some beautiful bonds could perhaps form between us. And so again, listening is a gift that we can give one another. It shows that we value the other person and what they have to share. When we listen, we let the other person know that we care about them, and that helps to build deeper relationships between us. And sharing our stories is a spiritual practice in this congregation. It's a discipline that helps us to find personal growth and to build a stronger community. And now when I talk about spiritual practice, I don't mean something that just casually happens. Sure, sometimes we make friends by happy chance, and that's a beautiful thing when that happens. We might find ourselves chit-chatting during social hour, discovering a mutual shared interest, and just voila, a friendship begins to bloom. And again, that is a beautiful thing, but that's not what I mean when I talk about spiritual practice. And the key word in practice is, can anyone guess? Spiritual practice. Practice is the key word in spiritual practice. There is an intentionality behind spiritual practice. When we engage in spiritual practice, we devote special time and attention to the thing that we are practicing for the purpose of getting better at it. If we're practicing violin for a concert, for instance, we are not just playing with it and having fun, although that can be part of it. We are also taking the time when we practice to learn to play more skillfully. And it's the same thing with our spiritual practices. They don't just happen. Instead, when we find some opportunity in our lives to practice, we devote our time and our attention to the work of improving certain spiritual skills. When we share our stories with one another as a spiritual practice, we are working intentionally on some very specific spiritual skills. We are practicing things like being brave. We are practicing being vulnerable. That's a spiritual skill, letting yourself be vulnerable. We're practicing trusting others. We're practicing speaking our truth. We are practicing treating one another as sacred mysteries. We are practicing listening deeply, practicing being non-judgmental, practicing integrating other people's truths, new truths with our own, and practicing holding others' stories with our care. That is a lot of work. That's a lot of work just for sharing stories. But just like there are classrooms beyond our walls to help us practice other kinds of skills in our lives, we also offer learning spaces here in our congregation to help us practice the spiritual skill of listening, of sharing our stories with one another. This year we expanded our faith formation programs to offer the Soul Matters program, the Soul Matters curriculum, which is in worship as well as in religious education. And these classes are designed to allow everyone in our congregation, kids and adults alike, to share your stories and to learn from them. Today our children will be sharing stories with each other in class, and in our adult faith formation classes this month, we have several programs that are designed to help you share your stories. Our Soul Matters small group explores our personal stories through discussion. Each person takes a moment to share one at a time. Our UU Writers group shares our stories through the art of writing. Our starting point class for newcomers shares the stories of our personal spiritual journeys, as well as Unitarian Universalism's journey, this congregation's story, and our story together. And then there's my new Creativity Matters class, which is starting next week. That class is going to let us explore our stories through art and creativity. We have other groups here, like our Women's Spirituality group, the Gathering of Men, and the Odyssey Project, where you can share and listen to stories. And as you heard during our announcements today, we are sharing our stories through our open questions process. Today after the service, you can share your stories about ways that you have felt welcomed or unwelcomed here at Morristown UU, as the congregation shares together in the exploration of the question, what does it actually mean to be welcoming? So this is another important opportunity for us to practice the art of sharing our stories, because it is just as important for us to share as it is to listen to one another in those sessions, those open question sessions. By sharing our stories together, we can forge a stronger community and provide some collective guidance about where we want to go next. Here's the thing, though. As much as we Unitarian Universalists absolutely love to talk, it can still be hard sometimes for us to share our stories openly, because the prospect of sharing our stories can make us feel really vulnerable sometimes. Our stories can reveal those imperfect humans that we really are, and we might be afraid that if we share, someone might misunderstand us. They might hear our story and get the wrong idea, or they might judge us. They might hear our story and see flaws that are really there or flaws that are not there. Those possibilities can be really scary. Do you remember how in our Time for All Ages earlier, the villagers were afraid at first to share their stories with the storyteller and one another, even though the storyteller told them that that was the most valuable gift they could give her in return for the stories? They worried that they would be judged or ridiculed. We all, if we are sharing stories, we share the stories because we want to connect with others. And so it can be really scary when, reaching out in such a vulnerable way to know that someone could instead slap our hand away and reject us. And yet, unless we take that risk, we can't reap the rewards, right? So we have to find the courage to let ourselves tell our stories anyway, even when we know that we might be hurt. We have to allow ourselves to trust that the people we share our stories with will treat those stories when they receive them with care. And that's why when someone shares their story with us, it's so important to honor their bravery. Oh. We're okay. So it's so important to honor their bravery and their trust by being trustworthy in return. And when we're offered the gift of someone else's story, it's important to treat it and to treat them without judgment. And it's also important to be really mindful about when and where we share their story with other people. Sometimes a story that we receive from someone isn't meant for us to share. It might be a story about something really difficult that happened to them that they don't want everyone to know about. But they shared it with you because they trust you. They trust you to treat it and them and their story with care. As a minister, I hold many such stories. These are stories that are shared with me in trust, and they stay with me unless you give me your permission to share. And it is always important for all of us to ask others if it's okay to share someone else's story. That's why when you fill out the Milestones and Patches form on Sunday mornings, there's a question in there asking, do you have the permission of the person this is about to share? Because it's so important for us to only share stories if it's someone else's story that we have permission to offer. So remember, our stories are gifts that it takes courage for us to offer. And so let's make sure that we are brave in the way that we share our stories and make sure that we are careful in the way that we receive the stories that others share with us. Let's go ahead and pause again now and take some time this time to stretch our bodies by rising and body your spirit. We're going to sing the second verse of our hymn now, again, 1008. Please be seated. I would like to wrap up today's sermon quickly with a quote by Richard Wagamese, who was an Ojibwe Canadian author and journalist. He wrote, "In the dark depths of long winter nights are the storytelling moons. Elders and storytellers who have been given tales to carry speak softly, reverentially, and the people hear them. The people do not merely listen, they hear. To hear is to have a spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical reaction to the words. Sometimes, at very special times, you have all four reactions and are changed forever. Share stories. Fill cold nights with the warmth of your connections, your relationships. Hear each other and be made more. That is the power of storytelling," he writes. My friends, when we share our own stories with each other, something amazing happens. Our stories begin to mix and blend, creating something wholly new, a shared story. It's like we are all pieces of that puzzle that fit together to make a bigger, more beautiful picture. It's like a love story, a romance novel. Such stories exist by weaving the stories of two different characters into one bigger story. And our congregation is like that, a shared story that cannot exist without our different personal stories. And even after we've each done the sharing of our personal stories, the story doesn't end. The spoken part may be over, but the new story that we've created continues to unfold among us. May we keep on sharing our stories. May we be trustworthy keepers of one another's truths. And together, may we weave a strong community, one story at a time. Amen. Blessed be. May it be so. Let's go ahead and rise and body your spirit one more time to sing the last verse of our hymn. Please be seated. It's time now for us to bring our time of worship to a close, but as we extinguish this chalice flame, its light will continue to burn in our hearts. As we go out into our daily lives, I leave you with the words of Leah Ongiri. May we know ourselves as vessels of infinite possibility, holders of each other's heartaches and tales of joy alike, weavers of one story in which each have our part. Amen. Blessed be, and go in peace.